United Nations member states have adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, a universal and transformative plan of action for people, planet, and prosperity, including 17 Sustainable Development Goals to be reached by 2030. How can such ambitious goals be achieved? Community participation, local action, and leadership will be crucial. It depends on you. Localizing the agenda means integrating the SDGs in the design, implementation, and monitoring of local development policies and plans, while putting territories in the center. Local and regional governments and other local actors are crucial to ensure the process is inclusive and accountable. Their local knowledge is essential to make the 2030 Agenda a reality for all. To provide support in implementing and monitoring the SDGs, 3 partners are gathering these experiences from across the globe to form a unique toolbox of practices and instruments. The online platform offers an interactive space to access these resources, adapt them, and achieve dependable results. You can discover practical tools that will guide you through the SDG local implementation process. Design enabling frameworks and strengthen your capacities. A library with a wealth of complementary material is also at your disposal. Upload your documents and tools and help pool our collective knowledge. Along with this, you can share your stories, engage in discussions, promote events, and connect with peers. The platform is dynamic. Contributions are vital. Participate now and start transforming the global goals into real local actions.
Right. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Mahmoud Muhiddin. I'm Senior Vice President at the World Bank Group. I'll be the moderator of this session on SDGs in action, implementing the SDGs in a changing world. I have very distinguished, experienced panelists with us who are going to help us navigate what's happening globally, regionally, nationally, and get a deeper dive on what's happening at the local level. We have Minister Bambang, who is going to join us, the Minister of Planning of Indonesia, but he will be joining us late. So I will be asking perhaps Lord Nixton or Nixton, Professor Nixton, to start us off by giving us kind of a bird's eye view on what's happening globally, what we should be knowing, what are the issues of concern, challenges, and opportunities facing us for the implementation of the SDGs. Almost 3 years have already gone since the launching of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. And a couple of years before blessing the SDGs, in 2013, the heads of the multilateral development banks, along with the IMF, sent a letter to the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, telling him that they are going to be ready to help countries achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, emphasizing the work on 3 areas that are going to be discussed today. One of them is related to improving information and working hard with countries to improve data and our knowledge of what's happening in the SDGs. The second is related to finance and how to mobilize domestic resources better, how to partner with the private sector and leverage private sector finance, and then how to help countries implementing their own national SDGs agenda in the field with the utilization of their experience, the knowledge accumulated in many years of implementing the MDGs, the predecessors of the SDGs, and aspects related to science, technology, and innovation were mentioned as well at the time. So, 3 years after the launching, people are wondering if we are on the right track, if there is a progress on the implementation of the SDGs, what are the indicators that are helping us to understand this kind of progress. So we have, as I said, a group of experts, policymakers, and heads of agencies who are going to discuss with us the progress so far and in what way we can improve in implementing the SDGs agenda. So I'll start with Professor Nick Stern, who will take the floor now, and he will have 4 to 5 minutes to share with us his views on what's happening. And given as well that he has a very important role, in addition to many things that he's doing as part of the team who did this impressive report of the eminent persons group on global financial governance for the G20, I'm asking him as well to share briefly some insightful suggestions coming from this report that could help us as well while we are trying to get the global system together to help in the implementation of the SDGs, perhaps to emphasize the aspects of relevance to the SDGs agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here, and please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud. You probably know it's always dangerous to say 4 to 5 minutes because it's very easily interpreted as 5 times 9. I'm going to talk about implementing the SDGs in a changing world. This is our subject. And I'm going to argue that the implementation of the SDGs will be the growth story of the 21st century. So when we talk about the challenges of implementing the SDGs, we should see this as, yeah? Okay. Can you hear me in the back? Yes? Very good. Can you tell me when that stops, and then we'll do something about it? You can also tell me if I become incoherent. The implementation of the SDGs is the growth story of this century. So we talk about the challenges, but we have to see this as a tremendous opportunity to do things differently. And I think we now understand that we have to do things differently. So understanding that is really to understand why we've moved to the SDGs. We've moved there because the extraordinary successes of the last 70 years. In the last 70 years, largely as a result of the sort of open rules-based systems which we've developed, we have multiplied income per capita by 4, global average, and because people have stopped dying so early, we've multiplied the population by 3. So we've multiplied in 70 years total output by a factor of 12. And we've done that in a way that's largely been driven by fossil fuel energy. So what we've seen then in this extraordinary 70 years in human history is an intense pressure on the global commons as a result of that degree of growth and that type of growth. We really started to focus on these issues perhaps 20 years or so ago. And it's very significant. Many of us in this room were involved in the creation of the Millennium Development Goals. And think of the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. It arose because we started to understand the problems created by this intense pressure on the global commons. And of course, we started to understand other problems too, like inequality, gender, cities, oceans, and so on, much better. I'm not saying we understand them well, but at least better than we'd understood them before. And because of that, the Millennium Development Goals became the Sustainable Development Goals. So we have this much richer and broader view of development now, but it's come out of an understanding of many of the problems created by the old model. Now, the meaning of sustainability, and you have to excuse me for being slightly professorial at this point, but the meaning of sustainability technically is offering the next generation at least as good opportunities as you had, assuming, of course, they behave in the same way to following generations. That's the technical meaning of sustainability that we use in formal analysis. And if we look at what drives then the opportunities of the next generation, there are essentially four types of capital: human capital, social capital, natural capital, and physical capital. And that should underline our understanding of the meaning of sustainable growth. It then is immediately obvious that if the way you do your physical capital destroys your natural capital, that undermines your human capital by poisonous air in cities that kills people off and makes them weaker and so on, you are not going to realize the potential for sustainable growth. You undermine growth if you ignore the human, social, and physical capital. If we build and grow in ways that become more and more socially divisive, think of social capital as being part of that story, we will undermine the growth process itself. So if you look at the meaning of sustainability, if you look at our experience over the last 70 years or so, you immediately get to a story that associates sustainable growth with the SDGs. Now, let's look forward. In the next 20 years, at a growth rate of 3.1, 3.2% for the world economy doubles. If you look at the way in which infrastructure is likely to grow, even though we have big infrastructure deficits, the next 15 years will probably see a doubling of the infrastructure. Decimal points don't matter here. If the world economy doubles in 18 or 26 years, it doesn't, the argument is essentially the same. Our city areas will double in 20 years. Our city populations will double in 30 or 40 years. If you take these doublings into account, this next 20 years is absolutely vital for the future of our civilization, because in that time we have to cut greenhouse gas emissions. In that 2 decades, we have to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 30% or more, depending on what probability you're trying to achieve for realizing the Paris goal of well below 2 degrees. If the new world economy looks anything like what we create in the next 20 years, looks anything like the old one, then you can say goodbye to cutting emissions by 25, 30% in the next 20 years. And you can say goodbye to holding to 3 degrees, let alone 2 degrees. And if you think, oh, well, I'm relaxed about that, remember, we haven't been at 3 degrees for about 3 million years. And our civilization since the last ice age is only 9 or 10,000 years old. We would be going way outside any kind of experience of Homo sapiens. And it would be intensely dangerous. And we've seen just this week how much more dangerous 2 degrees is than 1.5 degrees in the most recent IPCC report. So don't say relax, we're not going to get there, so let's cope with the temperature. That's not an intelligent answer to this question. Now, sustainable infrastructure is at the core of this story. Think about water. Water is crucial for health. Health is crucial for education. It's usually women who have to go and fetch water. They're in danger whilst they do that. It takes time away from the other things they can do, particularly girls education, and of course it's the poorest people who pay the most for the water. So health, education, gender inequality, all are associated with investment in water. You can go through power, you can go through public transport. You'll find 5, 6 or more of the SDGs associated with those infrastructure investments. So sustainable infrastructure is at the core of sustainable growth and at the core of the SDGs. So the last part of what I have to say focuses then, how do we foster the right kind of sustainable infrastructure? I've said that the challenge of achieving the SDGs is in large measure that challenge of fostering the right kind of sustainable infrastructure. Now, I'm going to do this, draw on a report which Mahmoud has very kindly left on the table here. He looks ahead and thinks through these things. It's making the global financial system work for all. That's the G20 eminent persons group, or allegedly eminent persons group, which he referred to. And much of that is about creating the conditions where these kinds of investments, particularly infrastructure investments, but not only infrastructure investments, can take place. And let me go very fast through some of the things that could take us there. The biggest killer of investment, whether it's green, brown, or purple, is government-induced policy risk. So key, the first part of the story, if you're going to unlock these investment opportunities, and they're wonderful investment opportunities, but we've got to turn them into real projects and programs, you have to have stable, sound government policies. Now, it's easy to say, not always so easy to do, but it's fundamental to realizing these investment opportunities. We will learn, policies will change, but they have to change in ways which people can anticipate and understand. I sometimes describe that as being predictably flexible. It's not being predictably rigid, and it's not being unpredictably flexible, it's being predictably flexible. And that's crucial to a sound investment environment, and good institutions can help with that. You need an investment climate. That's part of an investment climate, but you need an investment climate that's good. I've worked in UP in India for the past 45 years, and small firms in UP are visited by authorities twice as often as small firms in Maharashtra. And the person who makes the visit from the bureaucracy to these firms usually goes away a little bit richer than he was. It's usually a he before he went. The power supply in UP goes off much more often than it does in Maharashtra. That's the investment climate. People are trying to make decisions and investment decisions in that kind of investment climate. That's absolutely fundamental. And that's reliable institutions, reliable tax systems, things you can understand. The next thing you have to have is a clear plan for investment, particularly infrastructure investment in that country. If you don't know how the ports are going to function, if you don't know where the port improvements are going to be, it's very hard to design road and rail systems properly. You have to have some kind of integrated view. This is not rigid Gosplan central planning. It's a picture of where your infrastructure investment is going. This is part of what we call in this report the country platform. And if you've got a good country platform, then people can get behind that, whether it's the private sector, the aid givers, multilateral development banks, or whatever. You need good project preparation teams, and of course you need the finance. I've been talking about pulling the projects and programs through the system. You also, of course, have to have good finance for those projects and programs. The right kind of finance at the right scale at the right time. Infrastructure, for example, is tough in its early stages. That's where a big part of the risk lies. If you can get it through the first 4 or 5 years, then you've got something that, if you're successful, has a nice revenue stream. If it has a nice revenue stream, you can sell it on to those people who are looking for long-term investments for their pension plans and so on, but can't come in Indeed, regulators prevent them from coming in when it's too risky. So the multilateral development banks play a crucial role in getting, it can do equity, it can do political risk guarantees, it can do the right sort of long-term loans, and so on. So there is a very powerful story of the right kind of finance at the right time, where the MDBs, or it can be a country development bank too, of course, doesn't have to be a multilateral one, can come in, take the risk, share the risk. Its presence itself actually reduces the risk, because governments are less likely to monkey around with the policy environment for programs which have development banks involved. So even its presence reduces risk. So you can see that this whole story of risk management, which is crucial to the right kind of finance at the right time on the right scale, in that the MDPs play a very powerful role. So the big story in this report here is how we intensify still further, because the MDBs have moved in this direction, but how we can intensify still further the MDB's role in realizing the sustainable infrastructure, which is at the core of realizing the SDGs. Lots of other things in the report too, but I hope I've given you a flavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor Stern, for that. And after this excellent introduction and the emphasis as well on investment and the investment environment, which is very much emphasizing as well what the World Bank Group is trying to provide when it comes to solutions for achieving the SDGs and our twin goals for ending poverty and achieving shared prosperity. So if you ask any of the World Bankers, they would come back to you with simple 3 solutions to that. Invest, invest, and invest. Invest in human capital, and many of you attended the launching of our Human Capital Index, what we should be doing in education and health, what can we do while we're doing that to look after the special requirements for rural areas, for the underprivileged, and indeed for gender. The other aspect of investment is investment in infrastructure and inclusive growth, not just the old infrastructure, but the infrastructure for the future, including the infrastructure for digital transformation. And many of you attended our FinTech joint program and joint products with the IMF. And the third is basically about investment in resilience. And this can take us in different areas, from resilience to external shocks, to resilience against pandemics, or, as we had seen recently, resilience against natural disaster. From that broad perspective and good guidelines on how to deal with issues, we are going to tackle them at the country level first. Listening to His Excellency, the Minister of Planning of Indonesia, followed by 2 honorable ministers from Macedonia and Rwanda in that order. So, Honorable Minister, please come and join us. The floor of yours. Thank you. No, please. Yeah, please. You'll take the podium. Thank you.
Very good afternoon, everybody. Secretary Guria, OECD, Mr. Mahmoud Mohidin, World Bank, Excellency, Ministers, panelists, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to apologize because I joined this event late, and after this speech, I have to go back to my own program. And quite strangely, the program that hosted by my Ministry of National Development Planning Indonesia, is also about localizing SDG. So the topic is basically the same, and I was surprised a couple months ago when Mahmoud called me and then talking about the possibility of myself joining this event to give the keynote, while at the same time I have the event with this very same topic. But as my president mentioned this morning, this is not a time for competition. So our program is not competing at all with this program hosted by the World Bank. It's about localizing SDG, but of course we are in the mode of cooperation. Cooperation between international institutions like the World Bank and of course the government of Indonesia. So I would like to again thank the World Bank for inviting me for this important event. We know that SDG is a global commitment, and for Indonesia, it's already a framework for our 5 years development plan, especially the one that's currently going 2015-2019, and will certainly continue the implementation of SDG in the upcoming 2020-2024 National Medium-Term Development Plan. We can inform all of you that our SDGs National Action Plan is finalized and already launched by our Vice President. This year, we have started formulating our strategies and steps in implementing the SDG until 2030 with the Indonesian SDGs roadmap. Bring the global commitment to the national level, Indonesia has legitimate legal basis to mainstream SDGs into our development agenda, as the Sustainable Development Goals and targets are aligned with the national agenda and the priority agenda, and its program are in synergy with the SDG as stated in the 2015-2019 medium-term plan. We are not only committed to implementing SDGs, which means implementing our national agenda, but we are committed to do more. Currently, our office, our ministry is in the technocratic process of developing the 5 years medium-term plan to 2020-2024, and we will not only continue the current SDG target, but also continue to mainstream even more targets to our subsequent development plans. Just for your information, out of 169 targets of the SDG, we already mainstream 94 of them in the first 5 years, 2015-2019. In the next 5 years, our plan is to include all of the targets or to mainstream all of the targets. Out of 241 indicators, at least now, we already have 165 of them well-defined. The data are available, so we can start, of course, monitoring the target based on those indicators. But at the same time, our homework is still a lot because the rest of the indicators, we need to develop the data. We need to work with our statistical bureau to make sure the data will be available, timely basis, and more importantly, consistent, so we can measure our SDG achievement by time and especially in 2030. Indonesia has decentralized most of its development efforts to the local governments. Therefore, SDGs should also be localized to the subnational level, both provincial and district or cities level. In the subnational level, prioritizing provinces, district, municipality that recently had their election, their respective development plans will also accommodate SDGs target. This will ensure that SDG is not only efforts by the central government, but also efforts by all subnational government as a national effort and commitment to achieve the SDGs. Based on Indonesia's SDG legal framework, presidential regulation on the implementation of SDGs achievement, the strategies in localizing SDGs are SDGs action plan in national and subnational levels. The National Action Plan was enacted with ministerial regulation that I signed myself, and 12 subnational action plan out of the total 34 provinces in Indonesia have been enacted through their respective governors' regulation. The remaining provinces are finalizing their action plans and will soon follow enacting theirs. We need to share that the SDGs Action Plan is the first comprehensive planning document accommodating the non-state actors program and activities in which we recognize the cooperation and collaboration of everyone in achieving the SDGs. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we need to reiterate that we have implemented SDGs inclusively while ensuring that no one is left behind, as introduced by SDGs to strengthen development paradigm in Indonesia. This principle in SDGs implementation has been our biggest challenge. We have addressed this challenge by involving the government, parliament, private sector, civil society organization, including faith-based organization, universities and experts, divided into our 4 participation platform. The implementation of this principle are a challenge in itself, but also require further efforts to approach each participation platform due to their unique nature. Specific and targeted approaches become important to strategically identify the opportunities in the different role of each stakeholders to complement each other to achieve the SDGs. For example, while the government is responsible for making policies, we need the parliament to approve these policies and the budget, the business and philanthropy to support further financial needs, and academicians to provide better policy options. Collaboration of all stakeholders is apparent in our 2017-19 SDGs National Action Plan, in which more than 100 non-state organizations propose their programs and activities contributing to the achievement of SDGs in Indonesia. To name a few, some of the most active and participative non-state organizations are those in the field of gender, youth, maternal and children issues, health, governance, water and sanitation, urban waste management, and resilient city. There are some evidence to the fruitful collaboration between government and non-state actors. First, the example of the implementation of the Fishery Area Access Management Program in Southeast Sulawesi Province. This effort was initiated by Marine and Fisheries Office of the district and supported by NGO RARE Indonesia. Second, we have the example of legal assistance that is supported by the state budget, operationalized by the Legal Aid Institute, is also non-governmental organization. On the other end of spectrum of inclusiveness, we do not leave behind the SDGs beneficiaries. In ensuring everyone receives development services, data disaggregated by poverty level, sex, rural, urban, and disability becomes important. Indonesia already has data on poverty disaggregated by name and by address, which is used to improve programs on poverty alleviation, such as conditional cash transfer, universal health coverage, and educational assistance for the poor students. There is an urgent need of data in district, municipality level to reduce regional disparities, both among provinces and between district municipalities in one province. Thereof, Indonesia will soon collect district municipality data periodically to ensure that sustainable development programs can be implemented in all of its regions. Moreover, data on disability will also soon be collected periodically using the population census and intercensal population survey. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, SDGs aim to ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives, and that economic, social, and technological progress occur in harmony with nature. This ambitious agenda needs huge investment to make a big impact for the world. In Indonesia, we have developed blended financing scheme, inclusively achieving the SDGs. We have the biggest number of Muslim population, and we have huge potential in Islamic philanthropy. We initiated the Zakat for SDGs, on which Zakat is used to fund many activities to achieve some sustainable development goals. Another example is the establishment of micro hydro power plant in Jambi province in Sumatra Island. It is designated to provide electricity access for 4 remote villages, supplying 803 households and more than 4,400 people. This plan is a joint effort and blended finance of Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, the government, National Zakat Agency, Islamic Social Fund, corporate social responsibility of the local bank, Bank Jambi, and the international grant from UNDP. We also see huge potential in other inclusive financing schemes, such as public-private partnership and crowdfunding. We are now undergoing 19 projects, especially infrastructure, using PPP scheme, all of which contributes to the achievement of SDGs in connectivity, urban facilities, as well as social facilities. But investing for impact goes beyond financial support. The most important investment is in human capital. Human capital is closely related to SDG 3 on health, 4 on education, and 8 on employment. Working on SDGs as the framework, many challenges can be addressed, such as stunting and the provision of clean water sanitation, early education, access to electricity in rural areas through clean and renewable energy by creating decent employment to local people. Before I end my speech, I would like to reinforce the need of strengthening partnership to realize the ambitious 2030 UN agenda. As we have agreed, we need to further our efforts to end poverty and hunger everywhere, to combat inequalities within and among countries, to build peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, to protect human rights and promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, and to ensure the lasting protection of the planet and its natural resources. Finally, I would like to thank the United Nations, the IMF, and the World Bank Group for giving special attention to SDG implementation, especially in its localization, inclusiveness, and its impact investment. We still have much to do, and let's continue our great work together for the welfare of people without compromising the nature to achieve the SDG. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister Bambang, for joining us. And now, of course, the Honorable Minister had the advantage of playing on his own field, so he had more time than the average that's going to be given to the rest of the speakers, because we have some time constraint on that. But the shortage of time shouldn't really compromise the substance that they are going to be sharing. So I'd like to give the floor to the Honorable Minister from Macedonia, Honorable Minister Divdovsky, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was university professor. I could speak 45 minutes, but I will stick to the time. It's my pleasure to address in this forum with such a distinguished participants. Many thanks to the Indonesia for great hospitality. The first priority of the government of Macedonia is to country to become member of NATO and EU. The agenda focus on increasing well-being of the all citizens, rule of law, equality, and high quality of education and health system. And these policies are directly linked with the SDG. In achieving these aims, our government cooperates with different international organizations like various UN agencies, the World Bank Group, and other partners. This cooperation I could explain in three important and impactful examples. First is, the coverage of the preschool education in my country is around 25%. And our government aims to double it. Therefore, we work closely with the World Bank. We just signed a new project in order to improve the coverage of the early childhood education and to enhance the quality of social and child protection. This is directly linked with the SDG 4. It is inclusive and equitable quality of education. In addition, in this year's budget, increased resources are used in order, and they are dedicated for employment and higher wages in the preschool education. We also built and reconstruct significant number of the kindergartens in the country, and these policies will be enhanced in the next year budget. About the second example, one of the first steps that the government made in 2017, it was increase of the minimum wage. Further, we have prepared a comprehensive reform of the social assistance and child protection system. One of the pillars of the reform is introduction of the guaranteed minimum income, which will be the first introduction in our region. With strong support of the World Bank, we also work of improvement of child and education allowances. Our goal is to improve the targeting of the social transfers and they to reach the vulnerable group of population. In addition, we aim to introduce a fair taxation. Therefore, we will abolish the flat PIT and introduce the mild progressivity of the PIT. And of course, all of these measures are linked with the SDG 1, it is end of poverty, and SDG 10, reduced inequality. The third example is linked with the SDG 6. It is our commitment to ensure availability of water and sanitation for all citizens. Therefore, we are continuing our cooperation with the European Investment Bank in expanding water supply and the sewage system of Macedonia. In addition, EU supports strongly the construction of wastewater treatment plants. Also, I should not forget the extensive support that we are receiving from other IFIs as EBRD, World Bank, and KfW. At the end, it is my great pleasure that in 2 weeks from now, at the end of this month, we will celebrate 25 years presence of the World Bank in Macedonia. We will organize a conference dedicated to the human capital development, which is one of our main field of cooperation. I strongly believe that the governments, together with our partners, could achieve tangible progress in human capital development, and those activities will of course linked with the SDG. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Now we need to know about what's happening in Rwanda. Honorable Minister, please, the floor is yours. Honorable Minister Oziel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I'm very honored to be here to share with the audience about what Rwanda is doing in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Rwanda has successfully implemented the MDGs first. The lessons learned during the implementation of MDGs are for us, were the foundation on which we built the strategy to implement the SDGs. What we did for the MDGs, we integrated fully all the 8 MDGs in our national plan, sectoral plans, which means at the level of the ministries, but also at the level of district, to make sure that we have a coherent, integrated plan, including all the MDGs. We also integrated MDGs in our monitoring and implementation framework, which allow us, as the Minister of Finance, to monitor on a quarterly basis the achievement, the progress in implementing the MDGs. And we used to report on a quarterly basis to Cabinet on the progress. We also used our homegrown approach to stimulate implementation of national plans through the performance contracts, which every mayor of a district, every minister sign with the president on an annual basis. And we monitor quarterly, on quarterly basis, at the end of the year, we use an independent institution to evaluate the progress and to produce a report showing the achievement of each institution at central and at decentralized levels. This mechanism allowed Rwanda to achieve most of the indicators of the MDGs. We missed only 2 indicators. One was the reduction of poverty. We're supposed to reduce by half the population under the poverty line. From 60 to 30, we achieved 39, so we missed 90%. Another indicator that we missed is the stunting, among other indicators of malnutrition which we achieved, but stunting remained high. We are still fighting with it under the SDGs. So these lessons have helped us to also to strategize on how to implement the SDGs, which are more comprehensive and more ambitious, but same period, 15 years. So building on the experience in implementing the MDGs, we assessed our statistical system to see which SDGs indicators are already captured in our statistical systems, which ones can be easily produced by our National Institute of Statistics, and which ones require more work, more investment in the institute itself, but also in different administrations for administrative data, to make sure that we are able to capture, to measure, and to monitor all indicators. We also reviewed the all 232 indicators of SDGs to identify which ones are relevant to Rwanda. We found that 33 were not relevant, so we focused on 199 indicators, and in our various statistical surveys, but also in our administrative data, we are trying to include all these indicators that we can monitor regularly the progress in the implementation. We continue to use our monitoring system, quarterly and annual, to make sure that we are on track to achieving the SDGs. These are efforts at national level, but we also asked to talk about regional level of, in my case, it's Africa. Rwanda was privileged to host the SDG Center for Africa in Kigali. And this center, in collaboration with the Sustainable Development Solution Network based in the University of Columbia, have developed an Africa SDG index, which was produced this year. This index assessed the progress of 51 African countries to establish the status of each country towards achieving the SDGs. The report showed that the most advanced country is at 66%, which is Morocco, and the last country is at 35%. Rwanda is at 57%. We still have a lot of work to do. So what is good is that this center has at the same time produced a dashboard, an electronic dashboard that can be used by every African country to put in data and to measure the progress every year. So we think that with this tool, we'll be able to monitor the progress, to identify which indicators lagging behind, and require more effort. This first index has identified 3 indicators which are lagging behind. One is SDG number 3 on health. Second is SDG number 9 on infrastructure. And SDG number 16 about peace, justice, and strong institutions. These are, you see, they are red almost in every country. There are new development of this center. Liberia has accepted to host a sub-regional center for the West Africa and Zambia for the Southern Africa. We think that if we use this tool and we measure our progress periodically, we'll be able to advance quickly. I would like to end by challenges. Challenges are many. We need to build capacity in our statistical systems to measure and to monitor the progress. We need to build our capacity in our various administration for administrative data with quality. But also, we have the major challenge with this financing. As evidenced by the various studies, like by IMF, implementing SDGs require a lot of resources beyond the capacity of countries, especially low-income countries. In Rwanda, what you are trying to do, we have strategies for financing. We have the domestic resource mobilization. We are doing a lot in reviewing our taxation laws. We have recently revised our property tax to not to increase tax, but to expand the tax base. We have automated most of our tax services within the Rwanda Revenue Authority to make sure that we capture all transactions, especially the VAT. And we are also mobilizing long-term savings among our population. We are doing reforms in aiming at developing the private sector, including the financial sector to support domestic investment. For external resources, we are prioritizing concessional loans. We are aware that although we need to borrow, but it need to be done in a sustainable manner. Also, we still have some grants, although they are declining, but also working hard to see how the private sector can also get resources outside the country. So, to conclude, for the financing gaps, we think the effective implementation of our last SDG, which is SDG 17, on global partnership for SDGs is very important. This requires global cooperation, mobilization of all development partners to be more involved, to support strongly the implementation of the SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Now it's your turn, President Hoyer, the President of the European Investment Bank.
Thank you very much, Mahmoud, for giving me the floor and for the invitation. I looked at your face and I detected a certain glimpse of impatience. So I saw also the expectation to do what I did. I left my speech on the seat and will focus on a very few points, in a very targeted way. How proud were we all when we were sitting in the General Assembly Hall of the United Nations 3 years ago, celebrating the success of reaching an incredibly high number of sustainable development goals. Maybe that is going to be one of the problems one day, the high number. How proud were we when 4 months later we were sitting in Paris celebrating the success of COP21, COP15? Yeah? In both cases, we were successful in getting the international community together. I believe the multilateral development banks played a significant role in order to make this possible with all our governments. But also we pledged. Nowadays, we're hearing the reports where we stand. And you asked the question very clearly, Mahmoud. Are we on the right track? If you want to have a spontaneous answer from myself, yes, we are on the right track. Secondly, we are far behind schedule. Today, we hear 3 excellent reports, 3 countries which are managing that challenge very successfully. But if you take the overall picture, we are far behind, and we must address that. As the EU Bank and the by far biggest multilateral financial institution in this field, we are what we call a crowding in bank. It is part of the business model, part of the DNA of the European Investment Bank to crowd in the private sector. The most successful experiment we made recently was the so-called Juncker Plan, the European Fund for Strategic Investments. A simple thing, basically. I mean, it looks like alchemy, but it is very simple. It is the courageous step of parliamentarians and governments to shift budgetary funds from subsidies to guarantees. And with that guarantee buffer that was created under Mr. Juncker, we were able to crowd the private sector in order to finance relatively high-risk projects, which otherwise would not have found private co-financing. And I believe after we have delivered roughly 30 billion more than we had pledged at that time, that was 350 billion euros, we have delivered 345, we should ask ourselves what can we learn from this for development policy? Because also there, my main mantra is we will never reach the climate change of Paris or the Sustainable Development Goals if we do not crowd in the private sector more. All taxpayers of the world will not suffice to get there. If we want to crowd the private sector in, A, we must speak the language of the private sector. Second, we must produce projects which are interesting for the private sector. And thirdly, we must develop financial instruments or financing instruments which are marketable. 11 years ago, our bank, I'm innocent, I was not there at that time, invented the first green bonds. Some people considered us lunatic, but it worked very, very well. The market is now a couple of $100 billion or dollars, and we are still the largest issuer of green bonds. Now, the trick there was you needed to have clear criteria and standards. What is a green bond? You don't take a piece of paper painted green and say this is a green bond. You must be transparent and accountable for what you're doing. And with the international community, with our colleagues in the other institutions, we came to an agreement of what is a green bond. Now, when I talked to Antonio Guterres a couple of years ago on the success of the green bonds, he asked me, what can one do in order to make progress on sustainability goals? And I said, well, let's try to develop papers that might be marketable and tradable, which finance additionally development projects. 3 weeks ago, we issued the first sustainability awareness bond. The Luxembourg Stock Exchange, we were cautious, 500 million euro, were totally oversubscribed. So obviously the market is there, and the target is financing projects in a market which is relatively high developed. In this case, that's water. In the water business, obviously it works, and I think we can expand that widely. And we can offer something to the investors. The next targets, in my view, will be health and education. Also there, we can work on the basis of markets which can take such a new product. And we will check that out soon. And I believe the international investors community is much more open, and I'm very thankful for that, to explore this field together. Last remark, one of the biggest issues is, of course, infrastructure, in particular infrastructure in Africa. The percentage or mini percentage of money that goes from private pension funds and sovereign wealth funds and similar institutions into infrastructure in Africa is so minimal that if we achieve to let this grow by 1 or 2 or 3 per mil of these monies, the infrastructure problem in Africa will almost be on the way to a solution. So we must develop urgently in the context of G20, and we are talking about now for 5 years without real tangible progress, the development of infrastructure as an asset class for investors. They are ready to absorb that, but they need the transparency, the accountability, and the reliability of those who guarantee the quality and the sustainability of these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Toyer. Now the Secretary General, who introduced himself already to the podium of the OECD, Mr. Angel Gurria. The floor is yours, sir.
40 or 50 years ago, Tip O'Neill wrote a book, local, American politician. He said, all politics is local. Today, all politics is local, all policies have to be local, all the money is spent locally. Local is where the action is. So I'll focus only on the question of localization. I will present Reshaping Decentralized Development Cooperation, the key role of cities and regions for the 2030 agenda. Just, focus on that, and I will speak under the control of Lamia Kamal Chawil, who is the director and the one who produced the book. So anything you don't like, you can, complain to her. City leaders have core competencies that matter for many SDGs. Education, health, drinking water, transport, housing. Some national governments are responsible for the bulk of public investment on the ground. On average, 2/3 of the total in the OECD region are spent on the subnational level. It is estimated that 65% of the 169 targets, which we've been alluded to here, behind the 17 SDGs, will not be reached without proper engagement of and coordination with local and regional governments. We cannot overlook this crucial role. And we cannot overlook the fact that they need to be committed and they need to take leadership. Here we must acknowledge that mayors and regional leaders are on the cutting edge of global efforts to build more sustainable and inclusive societies. As we see with the OECD Global Coalition of more than 50 champion mayors for inclusive growth, local leaders are tackling climate change. They're tackling inequality. They're looking at other cross-cutting global challenges. The OECD Action Plan on the SDGs, endorsed by our ministers in 2016, acknowledges the role of cities and regions in achieving the SDGs, as well as the need for effective governance and coordination and dialogue to work across levels of government. On July 2018, at the high-level political forum in New York, we launched a dedicated program on territorial approach to the SDGs. This program aims to support cities and regions in using the SDGs as a tool for improving local and regional policies and development. We're working on 2 fronts. First, measuring locally. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. By measuring progress only at the global and national level, we will be sending a misleading picture. We will be leaving many people behind. We must go beyond national averages to document differences across regions and across cities within the countries. This is why the OECD is currently localizing the global indicator framework for the SDGs to measure, and the cities, the distance is something like what was mentioning about how far are you to the national averages, but also comparing with other peers, comparing to other countries. So we're leveraging our 20-year-long experience on developing indicators for subnational regions in all OECD countries. When I hear Macedonia, where I hear Rwanda saying, well, we measured, we're at 66%, but in some, the problem is we didn't measure these things. There are 169 targets. So can you measure all these targets? Are you prepared? Do you have the statistical base? Do you have the source for originating the indicators that you can follow the targets? Do you have a GPS system? The answer is no. Even the more developed countries in the OECD do not have a GPS system to track the SDGs. And we're working hard on that. Further, so we're basically, we've been assembling a regional database for 20 years, 359 large regions, 2,251 small regions. We also have another database, which is the metropolitan database, 329 functional urban areas with more than 500,000 inhabitants. So you have to put all these things together that you were building over 20, 30 years and make it count now. The measurement, for example, of SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. And the second thing is learning and coordinating. All three levels of government have to learn and coordinate. We're working with Kitakyushu in Japan, Bonn in Germany, Cordoba in Argentina, southern Denmark, Flanders in Belgium to provide tailored support and foster action. So dear friends, we're drawing on our long-standing experience with peer review studies, which were conducted in close to 100 regions in cities worldwide. We believe the OECD program on a territorial approach to the SDGs will help to upscale the role of cities and regions, pave the way for more evidence on their performance, their contributions, and help all levels of government use the SDGs as a tool to shape better policies for better lives. So count on the OECD. The OECD stands ready to work with you all, but also for you all to make the SDGs happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And please, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking this very special and exceptional panel for sharing their information, experience with us, the honorable ministers from Macedonia and Rwanda, the President of the European Investment Bank and the Secretary General of the OECD, and before that we have heard it from the Minister Bambank and Lord Stern. Now, a special address from our Managing Director, Mr. Shaolin Yang. Please come and join us. Thank you so much. And I'd like to welcome as well the second and final panel of this session, moderated by my good colleague and Senior Director of the World Bank Group, Lady Ijaz. Manage to have time, there's a parliamentarian from France, if you manage. Okay. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with the second panel and special remarks from our Managing Director, Mr. Shaudinienko. Floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we are running out of time, and also I would like to follow the steps of the previous speakers. I will skip my speech. I just want to welcome all of you to this event, and I would like to thank all the panelists and all the participants here for your interest in this particular topic. The World Bank Group are very much keen to achieve this SDG goals. For us, SDG 1 and SDG 10 are the key pillars for our twin goals. One is reducing poverty, and the other is to promote shared prosperity. So today, the topic here are very relevant: the localization, inclusiveness, and also investing impact. For us, we had a new strategy for 2030, which we called Forward Look. In that particular strategy, we have 4 pillars. Many of them just coincide with the ones we're talking about here. So we are very much in line and trying to promote the impact at local, trying to transfer the global aspirations at the local level and bring the benefits to our client. And we also try to promote inclusiveness, which we believe is the transparency process. We need to bring in all the stakeholders, public, private, academia, and the civil societies. All together, we're working for the solutions. And for the impact, the World Bank Group is also very much keen to have we call that the billions to trillions, which means we leverage our financial resources to bring a bigger impact to our clients. So very relevant for the topics here, and congratulations for the achievement so far. And I would like to encourage you for a very interesting and innovative discussions here today. And all the best. Thank you very much.
Charlene, thank you very much, and great to have this wonderful panel. My name is Ede Illa, Senior Director in the World Bank for the Social, Urban, Rural, and Resilience. And the good thing of not having enough time is therefore each of our panelists need to come up with 2 ideas that everybody will remember when they walk out of this room. And we heard a lot about localization, and therefore what we want to focus on right now is on the inclusiveness and investing for impact, the second and third point of this panel. So we're going to start with Reina Buys, who is the Vice Minister and Director General for International Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, a country that we all look like the example on SDGs. And remember, SDGs are universal. Every country has a plan to achieve those. But tell us, countries from around the world are sitting here, 1 or 2 things that the Netherlands is being challenged in order to achieve the SDGs, particularly on communities that are excluded, people with disabilities, refugees, unemployed youth. What is the Netherlands doing? 1 or 2 things that these countries can say, I want to learn more from the Netherlands.
Thank you very much. And of course, I could tell a rosy story, but I'm not going to do so. In 2017, my minister went to the high-level political forum in New York to present our selfie on the SDGs. We took ourselves a selfie to know where we stand. And generally, we can be complacent and say, okay, we are doing well. But we are doing not so well on 2 issues, and I want to mention them. One is on gender. If I look on gender equality in the Netherlands, we do have a gender pay gap. It's a shame, but we do have it. Mm-hmm. And we are not doing well in gender representation, women representation in parliament.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So that's where we need to do better. The second issue where we are not doing well is on renewable energy and climate. And that's a shame. So to share with you how we are now dealing with, I will take the example of climate because I think that's the most relevant to share at this moment. Our new government said, okay, we need to take this serious. We will reduce the CO2 emission by 49% in 2030 and to 0% in 2050. But being a small country, very densely populated, it's a huge challenge. Mm-hmm. And we organized 5 tables in which we have representatives from government, both central, local, and regional government, private sector, civil society, trade unions, everybody. And those 5 tables, one from industry, others about housing, transport, then energy sector and agriculture, made plans together how to reduce. And I think this is the secret we have. We call it the polder model or the Dutch diamond. We work together with all layers of society to find solutions, but we have big challenges.
So if you can say targets, inclusiveness, clear action into this process, and recognize that there are important challenges altogether.
Then
final thought.
Yes, one final thought is about refugees. We do have refugees in the Netherlands, and we do have challenges to integrate them fully in our society. That's why we do emphasis on language training, but also give them opportunities for jobs. But we need to do a lot better there. Thank
Vice
you.
Minister, thank you very much. Elliot Harris is the Assistant Secretary General and Chief Economist of the Department of UNDESA, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, United Nations. And then you just released a very interesting report on how to do the vision and strategy on private sector finance and a high-level meeting on the 2030 agenda last month. Now, give me 2 surprising ideas out of that discussion that will motivate everybody to read the conclusions and to read the report. The 2 surprises.
Thank you very much. I think the 2 surprises that I would point to out of that particular strategy are, first and foremost, that it has to be carried down to the local level, down into countries and down into the local municipalities, because that's where the SDGs happen. And I think one of the key points to recognize is that when we talk about localization, we can talk about bringing the policy down to the local level, but we also have to talk about bringing it into people's minds, into the way they think about it, into the way they make their decisions about consuming and producing. Now, we will see that happen, and we see it already happening in the way people are changing their behavior, and we see that then reflected in the ways in which not only enterprises produce things, but the ways in which finance is allocated. And that is the link that I see to the impact investing question, because whereas 5 years ago, impact investing, 10 years ago, was a niche phenomenon, you had highly motivated, highly informed people deciding they want to do it differently. Now we see that becoming a mainstream part of the way in which investment decisions are being made. And that is happening, I think, in large part because people are realizing that this is the way of the future, this is how we're going to survive, and this is how we're going to prosper by making sort of sustainable investments. One thought to be put out there, though, is that we are engaged in a long-term transformation, which means that in many respects we need long-term financing. That requires, on the one hand, that the policy frameworks change, but it also requires that the ways in which investors are regulated must change equivalently. And so I throw out as a challenge that we need to start reconsidering how we think about fiduciary duty, that investors, long-term investors, especially pension fund investors, are not held only to maximizing financial returns, but they also can try to maximize other returns. As Lord Stern said, the different types of capital also have
fabulous idea. Interesting discussion together.
It's starting to happen in some
Jay, who is from Citi, is going to come up on the sustainable investment altogether. So if I can summarize, it's not only localization, but it's individualization in a way to change behaviors, look at completely different ways of financing, and a really difficult question, what to do with the long-term investment in terms of sustainability altogether. Final thought.
And I think that that is one of the areas where we have to focus the most attention on the long-term financing that we need. There has to be a change in the way in which we regulate our financial markets to take away that bias to short-termism and make it possible for long-term investment to go into these sustainable investments, which actually do make a lot of business sense.
Process. Elliot, thank you very much. Professor Nora Lustig, who is the Samuel Z. Stone Professor of Latin American Economics in the Department of Economics at Tulane University, has been doing fascinating research on the issues of exclusion, on financial transfers, things of that sort. Your thoughts, how are we going to be able to bring excluded communities into the SDGs so that we can achieve universality? And I know that you have a fascinating book that we want to do a little bit of promotion. Professor Lustig.
Yes, thank you. Quickly, I think that one aspect that's very important was mentioned already by Gurria, that if you want to bring people that are excluded today in, the first thing you need to do is measure. them, have information, otherwise you're not going to know what you need to do. And the second very important thing is to have the indicators that are going to be sensitive to the fact that there are people left behind.
Exactly.
And I just wanted to say I commend the World Bank tremendously on the Human Capital Index that was launched a couple of days ago. It's really a very elegant and useful indicator, but it's not going to tell you if you're leaving people behind. Because to make it improve the fastest, you probably have to work with those who are closer to the threshold of making it to the point in which you have reached the goals. And therefore, you're going to have to fine-tune that indicator or have it at a disaggregated level so you can actually see what's happening with those you're worried about that are left behind.
Practical recommendation.
And
one lesson from your book. I want to promote your book.
Well, the book, this is, we do a lot of, in the institute that I direct, the Commitment to Equity Institute, we do fiscal incidence analysis, meaning we assess the impact of taxes and transfers on inequality and poverty. And this is a handbook which I can promote because I don't get any royalties. You can download it for free. It was published by Brookings, but thanks to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation support, the copyright has been covered. The interesting thing is that this can be useful for the concern that you have about people being left behind, because we have been able to do disaggregated analysis. Well, Karen has been doing pioneering work before also on genderized fiscal incidence analysis. We've done by ethnicity and race, by region, and you discover very interesting patterns that you didn't know would happen. And that will tell you where the efforts have to be put in order to close gaps that they're not intentionally there. You know, I told you the example of Brazil. In Brazil, there's a difference in terms of the transfers that people receive if they're Afro-descendants or whites. Obviously, that was not by design. It was during the progressive governments of Lula and Dilma. So it happened because the transfers that people were receiving were associated to being part of the Social Security system, even if it was not a contributory program. So the Afro-descendants were less part of the system, and they did not receive the transfers, so you had a bias that you were not aware of.
Absolutely.
So this type of instrument can help you identify those biases and work on them to get rid of them, because those shouldn't be there.
So with the universal challenges of SDGs, this dimension of bringing data and understanding the biases towards excluded communities becomes fundamental. Now, we always talk about gender as the gap, as women left behind and all that, but what Karen Groen, our Senior Director for Gender, has always pushed us is to say, no, that's the wrong way. Women are the key actors to change into this process. Karen, 2 thoughts about women and SDGs.
First of all, gender is about women and men, and I think we really need to focus on creating male champions for gender equality, because it's in men's interest as well as women. So let me give you 2 thoughts, though, on how we do this. I do agree that we need more data, and I'm going to give you an example of that, and then I want to give you an example of how we invest for impact. We're in a partnership with the OECD and UN Women right now for indicator 5.11, which is how the country's own laws that exist, that embody legal economic discrimination, whether it's against married women or married men. We have this data set for 189 countries. 104 countries have laws that prevent women from working in specific jobs. 59 have no laws on issues like sexual harassment in the workplace, which is a huge issue around the world now with the Me Too movement. And 45 countries have no laws on domestic violence. But the news is actually quite good, because we're also tracking where countries are reforming their own laws and policies. And there have been at least 65 countries over the last 2 years that have made 87 legal reforms, including on workplace restrictions. And that is really critical. Yet we have the furthest to go in terms of women's access to credit and access to finance. And here I want to come to investing for impact. Our colleagues at the IFC have estimated that female small and medium enterprises, which are only about 1/3 of all SMEs around the world, face a $165 trillion credit gap. That's enormous. Actually, no, sorry, $165 billion credit gap. So the World Bank is doing its part. We have to do its part with the private sector. We have created something called the WeFi Initiative, Women Entrepreneur Finance Initiative, which is intended to actually bring an ecosystem approach to creating markets, to helping more women access finance capital, access supply chain finance, work with larger corporations to actually start and grow their own firms. The goal is to use $347 million in grant finance to leverage more than $2 billion in finance from the commercial private sector. And I mention this because it's investing for impact. When you focus on creating SMEs, you're also focusing on creating jobs. You're focusing on it at the very local level. And often women create jobs for the social infrastructure, in the social sectors, the services that really matter in terms of productivity.
And that's a very nice segue to our final speaker, Jay Collins, Vice Chairman of Corporate Investment Banking from Citi. Now, Citi, big bank, looking at us, how do you look at SDGs? So where's the opportunity? What do you see your role? How are you thinking over the next 12 years on the 2030 agenda from your perspective? 2 thoughts that people will take notes and say, I want to learn more about Citi and SDGs.
Thank you. So 3 thoughts.
Okay,
in 2 minutes. Let me first thank Mohadeen, my dear friend, for including me in this session as the one representative of the private sector. And I guess I'd start with a little bit of Friday late in the day disruption. Disruption. And I came away certainly agreeing with Werner's comments earlier that from a week of back-to-back at the UNGA, that we are radically behind. And I think as long as we're measuring 2 to 3 year data as opposed to today's data digitally, we don't really know how far behind we are, but we're behind. And so I think we're going to have to disrupt, and the 3 things I'd say we're going to disrupt. So first one is our approaches and models. We have to take, as companies, the SDGs out of the CSR and foundation only focus and put them into the field with our consumers, with clients of all firms. We've got to put it in the boardroom. We've got to have it on management tables. And that's fundamentally a sea change in culture. We're going to need a cultural shift dramatically between public and private sectors. As we look at blended finance solutions, we struggle culturally to understand each other. We have to crowd in the private sector, and we have to create jobs. If you read Lila Jana's book on Give Jobs, fundamentally, we have to transform an aid-oriented environment to an employment, entrepreneurship, and livelihood environment. Second point is we are probably 2 trillion, and again, people argue about the numbers. I sat in Addis Ababa as we announced the SDGs, saying, maybe more than $2 trillion a year short in terms of the ability to fund this. And so we've got to come up with that. And there's 2 ways we're going to do that. One is disruptive finance. We have to take the sustainability bond concept, the billions to trillions, and make it reality. I just wrote a paper, there's not time today, but I'll post it so you can see it online, on 12 ways that we're going to get to $1 trillion of sustainability bonds. If we can't create $1 trillion of sustainability bonds, we can't fund the SDGs. It's doable. It's going to take a completely different approach. It's going to take a from green to theme approach. It's going to take a from marginal to a new normal. We're going to have to create risk of not doing it as well as upside for doing it. And we're going to have to embrace capital markets and the absolute order of magnitude, because we will never get there with ODA. And the second disruptor is really not the numerator but the denominator. And this is my third point, is applied technology. The way to take another $1 trillion of cost out is to take advantage of the synergies and the application of technology. I'm actually a adjunct professor at Georgetown. I teach a class on applied technology to development. And I tell my students, it's not going to be your grandchildren asking you about how you applied technology to the middle class consumer problem fast enough. The issue is going to be, are we going to take the greatest technologies of our time that are disrupting the entire world and that are here and real today and apply them to the greatest social challenges of our time? And we can take permission, distributed ledger technologies, AI applied to big data, connectivity and IoT, the latest technologies on identity and alternative payment models. There are 17 major technologies that are disrupting our world. It is the new horizontal, and it should be disrupting development. So if we take those three concepts, I believe that we can take this train that we're on the right track for, but radically behind, and catch up.
Fantastic. Look forward to reading the 12 reasons to get the sustainable bonds and $1 trillion out of disruptive technologies. I promise the panel to be out at 5, okay? So please join me in thanking them for a fantastic conversation. And we're going to have a final word while you walk out of the stage, and those of you who need to escape at 5, from Hervé Berville, a French member of the parliament who's coming here all together.
Thank you very much. No, you don't have a question for me?
No.
Okay. Okay, no, thank you very much. No, I thought I would have a question. No, thank you very much, and thanks again for the opportunity to just share a few words with you. And thanks the World Bank and the Vice President to putting in the agenda the SDG. Just two things I just wanted to let you know. The French President Emmanuel Macron recently tasked me with a mission to write a report on how we can modernize our foreign aid policy, and I gave him the report two months ago, and I will implement it. And there is two things that is really important for us and for the president, and maybe at 3 levels. The first one, at the international level, you know that France will hold the next G7, and the big thing of the G7 will be inequalities. And of course, the French president and the member of parliament, we really want that SDG and all the different goals are really included, integrated fully in the international agenda in the G7. So this G7 in Biarritz, south of France, will be the first one where the SDG will be like fully discussed and fully integrated in the agenda. The second one is at the national level. We will discuss and vote a law next year to increase our investment in SDG by 5 to 6 billion USD over the next 4 years. It's really important for us because we want to foster our investment in education, in health, in climate change, in gender equality, and in fragile state. And maybe the last one, because I'm convinced that especially in our country, if we want to embark also all of our citizens, we need to make sure that we have this conversation with our citizens, for my constituency, for example. And one of the ideas is that we will do, following next month, a Tour de France, a tour, where we will go to rural areas, our constituency, and discuss the SDG, what does it mean, and make sure that our citizens, also the taxpayer, they embark in this journey to make sure that there is local ownership, especially with the youth, and make sure that they understand what it is and why we invest in much more money. So thanks again for the opportunity, and France is fully committed to invest in SDG and make sure that we have all the challenges faced.
Thank you so much. And with these good remarks from France and the commitments to the SDGs at the local level and to how to get the citizens engaged, we conclude this session. I thank you all for being part of this session and being good participants in it. Many thanks to your support as well for this series of SDGs in action. Many thanks to my good colleague and partner in these sessions during many years now, Eddie Ejaz and his team, the fantastic team working on social development, urban and rural activities. Thank you so much. Thank you.